I'm joined here in Beijing, first of all, by Dr. Yoav Shoam, who is a professor emeritus at the Stanford University Computer Science Department and AI Lab. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
Also joining us, Dr. Zhang Hongjiang, former CEO of Kingsoft, so venture partner of Source Code Capital. Welcome as well.
Pleasure.
Last but certainly not least, we have Dr. Urs Gasser, who is professor of practice at Harvard University and also executive director of the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society. Welcome, sir.
Pleasure to be here.
I want to start conversation immediately. That is an important question. What do we need more? Policies to encourage AI to develop as technologies, or policy to make sure it would work within certain discipline? Yoav.
There is ample incentives from government and industry to provide research. It should continue. And AI, like seatbelts in cars, does merit careful scrutiny of how to best use it. But we should do it with a very light touch.
What is the light touch you're talking about?
A light touch one is that would recognize how far we are from the potential of AI for all the recent successes. And if we're not careful, will create all kinds of roadblocks that will not allow us to pursue. We just launched something called the AI Index that tries to quantify a little bit, how much is happening and how good the progress.
Can you use one sentence to describe it?
It's an 80-page report. So it does quantify the up and to the right that we see. It shows the move from symbolic reasoning to statistical and machine learning. And it also shows the interplay between academia and business, who was the driver when, and it changes over time.
Hongjiang, it sounds like Yoav is saying, wait a minute, we don't need that much discipline yet. We still need to find out what is going on right now. Do you think you agree with him?
Yeah, from a research point of view, I actually want to go beyond what Yoav was saying. I don't think at this moment, in terms of research, technology research, we need to put any boundaries there, any restriction there. When it comes to applications, that's when we should start thinking about regulation.
Tell us some of the examples.
Well, when you walk on the street, if you see camera everywhere, you may be a little bit scared instead of feeling safe. So that's a boundary I think we need to pay attention to. So is my privacy got intruded? Or versus am I safe walking on the street?
Whereas your position right now is extremely important. They seem to stand on different sides of the debate. So what about the golden middle way, or you have another proposal?
I would add one more perspective. I would agree that we need both enabling policies and constraining policies, and it depends.
On the fence is like that.
And it depends on the context. So, for instance, for certain uses, let's take autonomous weapon systems. That may be an area where we have a shared interest as a society that we have constraining policies. But I think even more important than that is we need learning policies. The chances that we get the policies wrong today in a world where the technology is moving so fast and the world is changing so quickly is quite high. And so the big challenge is not only which sort of policy we need, but that policies may have to be adjusted constantly.
You talk about atomic weapons. AI could be used in that way. And for now, there's no regulations against that. So Yoav, you're saying we don't need regulation about that. We don't need disciplines about that.
This is not what I said. I did not say that we should take AI and make terrible uses of it. That would not be good.
Well,
it's true for every.
You're not saying it, but people are doing whatever they want to do with that technology.
There are, and I wish there were a lawyer in the room.
That conversation will be much longer than this.
No, we have one. But I think it's true that when technology changes, sometimes you need to interpret the laws, and sometimes even create new laws because the previous didn't apply. So it's an opportunity to look carefully, but the general principles don't change, I don't think.
But you know what? The laws usually cannot catch up with the realities. Laws only happen when the reality is already leading the way. So when you say the laws will be able to help us to protect us from any danger a new technology could create, it might not be the case. The lawyer in the room should know. Worse.
The lawyer in the room would agree. But again, I think you're absolutely right. Of course, the technologies are not developing in a vacuum. There are existing legal norms that apply. But as you pointed out, the question is, can these rules, these old rules apply? Are they feasible when it comes to some of the new challenges, but also opportunities presented by the new technologies? And that's a hard question for the legal system, because you may have to deal with a paradigm shift. I give one example. In data protection law in Europe, there is now a new regulation in place that suggests that there is a right to explanation of automated decision-making systems, of algorithms, right? So someone has to explain what's happening in the black box when you're denied, when you applied for a credit with a bank and you don't know why as a customer. But the problem is that what seems straightforward from a legal perspective may be harder to ask from a computer scientist, because in the world of machine learning, it's not a trivial task to actually explain, exposed in an individual case, what has happened in the black box.
You know the lawyer in the room, there is the scientist in the room that wants to challenge you. Go ahead, Yoav. I'll have you also to join later.
May I? Sorry, go ahead. I just want to thank you for making my point. Here you have a law in Europe that applies, and without change, it applies also this new technology. Now, it places a burden on how to apply it, for sure, but the law didn't have to change for this. Thou shalt not kill. We're not tweaking thou shalt not kill. That will stay there.
First of all, let me say it's heartening that my colleagues from computer science have so much trust in law, which I like to hear. I think the story is way more complicated than that, because it's a problem if actually what the legal paradigm is doesn't really match what the technical paradigm is. And let's say with the example of the self-driving car, to use the physical safety example,
all the big companies around the world are listening to your arguments right now.
So what, for instance, from a legal perspective is a fundamental paradigm shift is the question, what behavior do we expect from a vehicle or the driver that is now virtual, right? That decision is now put ex ante and put into the software of a car, while we cannot foresee what the actual situation will be, where a maneuver you have to turn right or left to avoid an accident. We basically make these decisions that the law traditionally makes after the events, before the events, because we have to tell the software engineer how to program the autonomous vehicle. That's a paradigm shift for us lawyers.
Paradigm shift already happening. Lawyer says so. What about the scientist?
I'm not a lawyer, but I'm a logician. I will claim that the principle hasn't changed. Even now, when there's an accident, you need to go do the forensic and assign blame and responsibility. Even when you plan the car, you need to anticipate that anti-lock brakes will function a certain way. Now you're absolutely right. Now we have much more, either to retrospective analysis or prospective planning, because we have this new artifact called software that behaves in very complicated ways. You're absolutely right that the implementation of the principle is very difficult, both after the fact and ex ante. I totally agree with you there.
You know, we are not actually programming the cars how to drive. We're actually programming the algorithms that have learned to drive.
So
very much like
finally, you mentioned that key word, algorithm. People are saying those who design those algorithms are devils, especially journalists like us. You know, you have one algorithm today, you have another algorithm. Our report just disappear like that overnight.
Oh, there are some very bad programmers, I have to concede. Not all programmers are good people, but
the one that is sitting beside me certainly is on the very shiny side.
I hope so. But look, all software is prone to misbehavior because it's such a difficult piece of an artifact. And so long before AI became the topic of the day, people spoke about verification of software. Certainly in mission-critical if you're going to fly an airplane and or a shuttle, and but even in tax, you know,
there's nothing new.
No, what is new is that the software now is much more complicated, and especially when we get to some forms of machine learning, where it's not only when you write the program, you have very little sense of what the program will do. And so that's where it calls for much more thinking of technologists and policymakers to get those algorithms to be more transparent, predictable, verifiable.
When it comes to software, I think, Mr. Zhang, you better jump in. You're certainly an expert of it.
Yeah, but I think what changed it from the past is that, you know, in the past, everything is programmed. So if of course, the software may have bugs, so the bug can cause trouble. But today, there's not only bugs, it's that you program a learning scheme, but actually how it learns, what kind of data you fit into it, that could lead to different results, different behavior. So it's definitely more complicated.
Should we entrust them about what kind of life we are going to have? The more we know, the more scared we got.
We have to trust ourselves. So
I came here by an airplane, so in a way I trust engineers already that they're doing a good job. But of course you made the point about the complexity, right? And I think that's a real question, because trust only works, as we know, if we have a baseline understanding what's happening in the relationship. So it's not that you trust if you have zero understanding or information about the system. You need a certain level of educational awareness, and I think that's the problem. Do we already feel comfortable that we have some sort of safeguards in place? I would say many people don't, or again, depending on context, may not have the same confidence. But I want to add another point that is perhaps creating some sort of uneasiness from a legal or policy perspective, which is an addition to the point of complexity. It's not only that the algorithms are getting more complex and, as you described it, also for even the experts, harder to foresee how the system will behave given the self-learning character. It's also, I think, that the relationship changes who has the agency, whether it's the machine or the human being, when it comes to connecting action to the results of what the system produces, right? And that shift in autonomy from the human being, it's a gradual shift, it's contextual, I understand, but the trend is it goes away from the human being towards the machine.
There are already news suggesting that robots has to be responsible for their own behavior. Some suggest that that could be possible. Hongjiang, I don't know. What do you think about that possibility?
At this moment, I don't think this is something we need to worry about. It's a long way to go before robots actually could take its own action. But by mistake, it could hit someone.
When you said it's a long way to go, I noticed a little shrugging of shoulders from Yoav. Obviously, there is something more that we need to know from you.
I don't think that the trust hinges so strongly on understanding the goings-on. I don't think we're comfortable in airplanes because we understand aerodynamics, or we trust the GPS because we understand the algorithm. It just works.
Okay.
And I think that when we see the technology works, we'll be happy to entrust it. Now, there will be a social thing that I don't know how it will play out. And what I mean by that is, again, we're going back to self-driving cars, just for example. Cars may be 10 times safer than myself, but the first time it crashes, I may lose all trust in it, even though it's not rational. And that I don't know exactly how it will play out.
Interesting things you talk about, even about the cars. It's not the technology of the cars, of driving on the road, that we worry about. It's about the personal data it is likely to collect. There's a lot of privacy issue involved. There's also a lot of concerns about how the technology will be used by those who have ill intentions against whether us or them. So that is the concern.
I think issues of privacy, and both in terms of personal kind of privacy and concentration of power because of some corporations or countries hoarding the information, is a real concern. I don't think it's an AI concern. It's an information technology issue, and a very legitimate one.
And it should work under the international system that we should create when it comes to even AI. AI is just another technology.
I mean, I'm teaching privacy, so I don't want to give a lecture. I would agree on both aspects that you mentioned. One is the question of who's setting the rules internationally, as many of these technologies cross borders. It's a complicated story, particularly if you look at who has the power in developing these technologies. It's large global companies, and there has been a shift in rulemaking away from the nation state towards the companies that bring us these wonderful technologies and the terms of services, how to use it and the like, right? So how do we deal with that on a global scale? But I also would argue that the privacy discussion goes beyond AI and is of course a complicated story. The only maybe wrinkle I may add is it's even worse because it's a paradoxical situation that in some instances we may actually want to have more flow of personal data. Sometimes we really depend that people are willing to share data. And so we have roadblocks in science. And how do we figure out where to open the floodgate and where to close it? Or maybe another way to think about it is, where do we put restrictions on certain usages and allow other types of uses of the same data? I think these are some real paradigm shifts also within data protection law.
Hongjiang?
Yeah, I think wherever there is a high concentration of data controlled by one entity, that's where we should pay attention to. We should put more restriction. On the other hand, the real key is in where you want apply, how you want to apply those data.
Right.
You know, if it's healthcare data that apply share the data, you know, across various countries, across various hospitals, humanity.
But the reality is now you have, you know, if you look at the data when you talk about sharing, there are a lot of national boundaries. And there are also company boundaries. They don't want to compete, their counterpart to compete against them, even within the country. So when we talk about AI and the development of AI, we know, and you know better than anybody else sitting in this room, that it really depends a lot of data sharing so that the deep learning process will continue.
I think it's an important issue. I don't think it's the only issue. And I don't think that AI will forever be synonymous with learning based on big data. But yes, there's no question that that the issue of the availability of data and data sets, real-world data and training data for algorithms is an issue that I don't have a magic solution, but it's something we need to pay attention to.
I know you are already thinking about this. So the thing is, who are the players to come up with some kind of mechanism to whether regulate or encourage or disencourage certain different kinds of practices worse?
You know, I mean, it's the unequal bargaining power. I mean, there are huge economic interests at stake. There are massive national security interests at stake. This technology is of use in military contexts too.
And the gap between the rich and the poor,
of course,
the rich
you
and
know,
the poor countries too.
Absolutely, the losers and the winners. So there is a lot of power problems that are also bigger than AI, to be honest, but are of course accelerated in some sense. But to your point, I do think in a slightly idealistic way that we need to have multi-stakeholder dialogue, that we need to bring together governments and industries and have also a conversation about the values. As you said before, what do we hope to get out of this technology? And that requires time. And the biggest challenge is, as the technology, again, there are different viewpoints on that, but developing relatively quickly compared to the impact they have, we don't have the time for that dialogue, which needs to happen locally, nationally, but also globally. And so how do we find shortcuts for these value conversations that we need to have?
We don't yet have an answer. We don't have an answer. Yeah. You know, sometimes when you really see complicated issues, you want to just put it aside and think about something you know. What do we know as human beings? History, our philosophy, what our ancestors has created, that's what we know. And I'd like Hongjiang to talk about that. In China, we have a debate from thousands of years ago. What is the nature of human being? To start with, is it the goodness in our heart, or is it the evil that is in our heart?
if you look at a human has something that I don't think AI will never learn. That is, we have the appreciation of life. We have the fear of death. And so that's what differentiates us from machines. 人之初性本善.
So whether it is goodness or evil, we don't know. That's a debate in China for thousands of years.
But I will be on the more optimistic side. I think good intention.
Is it wishful thinking?
Yeah. Good intention is where we started, and evil came out in the process. Yeah, I'm very optimistic here. We have been dealing with this problem for the last 30 years. So this issue has been debated for a long time.
Okay.
And we already have some rules coming out. We'll continue building more, understanding more rules, and so not something I really worry about.
All right. Well, here comes the ultimate answer.
One characteristic that defines a human being is the sense of free will, that they can make decisions free of any influence and chart their own course. There's a famous quote by an ancient rabbi, Rabbi Akiva, who said, "Hakol tzafui ve'rashut netuna," means everything is foreseen and free will is granted, a paradox in the same sentence. Much later, recently, in the 20th century, Isaac Bashevis Singer, in his Nobel Prize speech, spoke about free will, and he says, we have to believe in free will. We have no choice, which is, of course, is a different kind of paradox. I think it'll be very interesting to think about machines and humans through the lens of free will. Can machines have free will? Do we? It would be an interesting conversation to have.
Absolutely. Final words from you? Urs?
Well, as a Swiss, I would say Switzerland is a country with a direct democracy. That is, people vote essentially on everything and anything. And I like that idea, to involve the people in important decisions of shared concern. But it also requires an educated public. And so my emphasis in terms of first principle would be education. And that's a big task, given the complexity and the information asymmetries we touched upon.
You know what, gentlemen, what we have said today will continue. I'm sure that debate will be repeated and continue in many different occasions. But for now, I really want to thank the three of you. Thank you so much. Yoav Shoam,
Thank you.
Zhang Hongjiang, and Urs Gasser. Really appreciate it. Thank you.